All right. Hi guys. Today we're on day 6, block 1. We're getting into one of the biggest topics of this geometry section for this course. We're looking at congruent triangles. So we're really going to be taking everything we've done so far and putting it together to show that two entire triangles are congruent. So let's talk about what that means first. There's this big statement at the top here: corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. That's all I'm going to say about it now, because we'll talk more about this later in another lesson. We'll get into all of that. It's pretty straightforward, but we don't need to worry about it today. What I really want to talk about is this picture over here and what it means for two triangles to be congruent. So the statement you see, it says triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. One of the most important things when we're talking about congruent triangles is the order of the letters. So the order of the letters matters. It's very important, because what you're saying is the orders of the letters are referring to the angles or the vertices of the triangle, which in turn means the angles. So for example, because A is first in the first triangle, D is first in the second triangle, that means angle A and angle D are congruent to each other. Okay, so the order helps you figure out which parts are congruent. Now this picture is easy to see because they're in the same orientation, but most of the time they're not. One is gonna be turned a different way. Okay, so when I list the congruent sides of these triangles, I can say, for example, that AB is congruent to side DE. Okay, I'm just going with the order of the letters. AB is first, DE are first, so those ones match up. And then I can keep going. Segment BC is congruent to EF, again matching up the order of the letters. And then our last pair, AC and DF. So again, A and then C matches D and then F. So the letters help you not as much as the picture. I didn't really even look at the picture when I was writing out these sides. I was looking purely at the letters of our congruency statement. Similar idea with the angles here, congruent angles. Angle A is congruent to angle D. Angle B is congruent to angle E. And angle C is congruent to angle F. Order matters here. I can use only one letter, that's fine for these angles, because there's no confusion when I say angle A. You know exactly what I'm talking about, this one right here. There's no like other ray coming off where you're not sure which one it represents. Okay, so let me erase that. That being said, let's talk about our types of congruency. So there are a bunch of different ways that you can say that two triangles are congruent depending on the information you know about those triangles. So I don't actually have to know that every single side and every single angle is the same to conclude that they're congruent. Okay, so we're going to go through some of the different types right now. So the first way that we're allowed to say that triangles are congruent, the labeling or the abbreviation SSS, what that stands for, I'm going to write it over here, we say side, side, side. So for this first one, I'm going to write out like the long-winded entire definition. For the other ones, we'll kind of shorten it up once we get the idea here. So I'm going to type it. So when we're saying side, 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 that means if I have two triangles, all three sides are the same, so then I can conclude the entire triangles are congruent. Okay, so in technical math words, we're going to write a conditional statement. So if three sides of a triangle are congruent to three sides of another triangle, then the triangles are congruent. So that's a really long-winded way of saying if three sides are the same, the entire triangles are the same. So what it looks like here, I'm going to draw in some triangles. Let's see, here's my shape tool, triangle. All right, so there's one, that's really weird. Here's another one. Okay, let me try that again. So they kind of look the same. All right, so if the triangles are congruent by side, 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 I'm not going to worry about labeling these right now with letters, but I'm going to use tick marks. So like this side, congruent here, 2 tick marks matches 2 tick marks, 3 matches 3. So this information right now would be enough to say that these two triangles are congruent to each other. Okay. Our next type of triangle congruency, side, angle, side. Oops, side, angle, side. And what that one means, oops, sorry. So we need 2 sides and the included angle to be the same. So hopefully you're understanding, like I'm meaning 2 sides and the included angle are congruent in 2 triangles. That's all I'm going to type for now instead of the entire conditional, just to save us some time. So 2 sides and the included angle. So notice the language up here. We wrote side, angle, side. That order matters. Side comes first, the angle's in between the other side. So let's draw some triangles. Okay, they're not perfect, that's fine. So if these 2 triangles are congruent by side, angle, side, we might have this side here congruent. The angle has to be in between and then the other side. Okay, so notice the angle is kind of in between the 2 sides. It's not like it's this angle over here. All right, so where things are is really, really important. Next one, angle, side, angle. So this guy would be 2 angles and the included side. Again, that means the side has to be directly in between the 2 angles that are congruent to each other. Okay, so let me draw. Okay, so if we're doing angle, side, angle, let's say I start here. Let's say I know that these 2 guys are congruent, and then I know the bases are congruent. So then my other angle would have to be here. Angle, side, angle. The side is right in between the 2 angles. Okay. All right, we got a couple more here. Our next one, angle, angle, side. Whoops, sorry. So again, remember, this is saying these, if I know that these 3 pieces are congruent in that order, then I can say the entire triangles are congruent. So this one, we have 2 angles and the non-included side. So look at, again, the order. Angle, angle, side means the 2 angles kind of are next to each other and the side is not in between them. Okay, 2 triangles. So in this case, if it's angle, angle, side, so let's say it's this angle, congruent here, that's bad arcs, and then these 2 angles. So then it would have to be the non-included side. So it really could be either one of these. We'll go with this one, why not? Right, angle, angle, side. As long as it's like, you can still say it's congruent if it's this angle, or sorry, this side that's in between them, but then we would just use a different congruency statement, right? So for this particular one, angle, angle, side means that the side's not in between them. And then our last one is a little bit more specific than these guys. It's called hypotenuse leg. So hypotenuse leg. So that tells me right away I'm looking at a right triangle instead of just any angled triangle. So if the hypotenuse and leg of a right triangle are congruent to the hypotenuse and corresponding leg of another right triangle, then the triangles are congruent. Okay, so this is specific to right triangles only, obviously, because we're looking at hypotenuse and legs. So if I draw my triangles, I can hold the shift key to get right triangles. So here's one, and here's the other. So this is nice because I only need two pieces of information. I need the hypotenuse to be congruent, and then one of the legs. But there is kind of a third piece. You do need to know that it's a right triangle. This is only true for right triangles, okay? Then you can say that these two triangles are exactly the same, congruent. The one thing I want to point out before we do a couple examples here, with all of these congruency statements, you'll remember them easier. We're going to use them a lot. But one of them that's not included, that is often mistaken as being included, is SSA, side-side angle. It is not a triangle congruency, at least not yet. If you take pre-calculus, then you start to talk about this one because this one has a whole bunch of other stuff going on. A lot of my students call this guy the backwards butt because it's kind of a bad word. So if you look at it, you're looking at a triangle and you're thinking to yourself SSA, remember that bad word and you're like, oh, that's bad. No, can't use that. That is not a thing. We don't do anything with that in this class. Okay, so just something to keep in mind there. So a couple examples here, we'll do a few together and then you'll try some on your own. All we're doing right now is stating if the triangles are congruent or not. And when it says state how you know, that just means to use the triangle congruence statement, the three letters, okay? So when I look at this first one, I see a side and a side, so those guys are congruent. I have angle measures that are congruent. And then one thing we'll see a lot, when two triangles are connected like this, we're going to put two tick marks here. Doesn't really matter how many, but we'll put two because these guys all each have one, to show that that's another congruent side. They share that side, so it has to be congruent. So when I look at this, if I just start here, I have a side, side, and then an angle. And that's actually the one that we just talked about, which we're not going to use because that doesn't hold true. That we cannot say that these are congruent based on side, side, angle. So we're going to say not congruent. We need more info. Kind of a tricky one to start with, but you're looking at the pieces of information you have to make that determination. Number two, so I have this angle here only has one arc. It matches this guy over here. And then the angles with two arcs. And then again, a shared side. So I'm going to put a tick mark there to show that. So when I follow kind of my labeling, I have angle, side, angle, congruency. So I'm going to say, yeah, these guys are congruent by angle, side, angle. Okay. My next one, number three, I have sides already marked. So the three tick marks are congruent to each other. I have two tick marks congruent to each other. Now be careful here. Sometimes you look at a picture and you're like, well, these angles are probably congruent because they look the same. You cannot assume anything like that. You don't just get to make it up because it looks the same. You have to actually know, either like through geometric reasoning, the information is given to you, something like that. You cannot just say, oh, they look the same, so they're probably the same. So the only other thing I do know is that these middle sides are the same because they're shared. So they're congruent to each other for the two triangles that I have. So looking at my picture, this one's pretty easy. Side, side, side congruency. Yes, they are congruent. Okay, we have one more to do together. So I have angles, I have a side, and then I'm trying to label something else because we're always going to need three pieces unless it's that right triangle, that special one, hypotenuse, leg. So the only other thing I know for sure based on this picture is that these middle angles are congruent because those are vertical angles, right? So this is like a geometric reasoning why I can say they're congruent. So in a proof, this would be my reason for the statement that these two are congruent. So now I have angle, side, angle for the congruency statement. Okay, so I want you guys to try the next four on your own, and then I'll go through the answers here. All right, so here are my final answers. Number 5, I said not congruent. We definitely don't have enough information because only 2 things are labeled and there's no other geometric reasoning I can use. Number 6, angle side angle. Notice I did not use hypotenuse leg, even though these are right triangles. I don't know anything about the hypotenuse, so I can't use that as my reasoning. I have vertical angles though. Number 7, be careful here. This one is not congruent. The angles that you have are not in the same position. They're not corresponding, so we can't say that they're congruent triangles. And the last one is side, side, side.